Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar run by RABDF. This is the second webinar we're running this week, as we decided earlier in the year not to run our normal policy and business conference face-to-face. So we're running 3 webinars. The first one was yesterday on the effects of future policy on the sector, and you can find the outcomes of that on the RABDF website. Today we're looking at protecting our product, how welfare and labelling go hand in hand. And then tomorrow we're looking at environmental challenges facing the sector and the development of future legislation. So welcome to you all. I'm Tim Brigstock, Policy Director for RABDF. We couldn't do this without help from our sponsors, so many thanks to Barclays and For Farmers. It's hugely appreciated your support. So we're very fortunate this morning. We've got 2 very well-known speakers, and first up we have Christine Tacon, who's probably best known as the first Groceries Code adjudicator, a position she held for 2 terms of office, and she finished that in October 2020. Since January 21, she's been chair of Assured Food Standards, or better known as RABDF, which manages and promotes assurances on behalf of the food industry. She's got a wealth of experience and continuing involvement in all sorts of aspects of the food and farming sector. And I think it's worthwhile noting that she ran the cooperative group's farming businesses for 11 years. So Christine, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you. I was just noticing before we started that this is probably one of the few conferences where I'm quite proud of my background pictures. Famous dairy cows and bulls, and you might think, why on earth she got pictures of those? And my mother actually worked for the National Advisory Service and was advising dairy farmers how to increase milk yields after the war. And my uncle was a dairy farmer, and he used to have 20 cows. So just to give you an idea, but I inherited some of those pictures from them. But yes, I am chair of RABDF. I think it's very different being a chair of something to being the chief exec, and you're not necessarily anywhere near as knowledgeable as everybody expects you to be, because you know I do this role 2.5 days a month. And when I agreed to speak to you, I had no idea what the topic was going to be. And so when the topic came through about labelling and its link to animal welfare, I had to go back to RABDF and ask them to help me with some slides, because it's not an area that I'm hugely knowledgeable about. But I'm going to talk to you about it now, but hopefully you haven't got any really difficult questions, because I probably don't know much more than I'm telling you. And but also I will of course get back to you and answer questions after the event if I get completely stuck. Now I recognise that you might be talking to me about this or ask me to talk on this subject because DEFRA is currently consulting on method of production labelling. And RABDF have actually had some extensive meetings with DEFRA, taking them through our research and our understanding, and we've provided that evidence to anybody in the industry that asks for it in order to prepare their response. So if I can move on to the next slide, please. Have we moved on? I can't actually see if we've moved on. It's the red one. That's right, absolutely perfect. Thank you very much. So I thought I had better start with a bit of the background of RABDF. There's quite a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation in social media. So I will take every opportunity I can to make sure that I can get the facts across. That RABDF is an independently verified as a world leader in food chain assurance. It's owned by the National Farmers Unions of England, Scotland and Wales, at AHDB, Dairy UK, and they all have, so they all have sort of £1 shares. It's a not-for-profit. Every single penny that we make is reinvested in what we do. And we do have 2 ownership board meetings a year. But on top of that, we have the board, the technical advisory committees and the sector boards. But going back to, it was created in 2000 after BSE, the salmonella scares and foot and mouth, because there was very low confidence in British food. And we even, Jim sometimes shows a poster that was put up in a McDonald's that says, "We do not serve British beef here." And I think that sometimes we can forget, now that we do have so much support for British food and farming, and for the quality and the standards of our products, where we actually came from in the year 2000. And Red Tractor was established to reassure the consumer that British food was okay. And now every major retailer and many of the caterers insist on Red Tractor as their British buying specification, and what they will expect. Some of them put it on some have it on the packaging, and some of them don't, but almost every retailer specifies Red Tractor as a minimum. And it is a very broad standard. There's 46,000 farmers are Red Tractor certified, and of course the dairy industry is the exception, in that 98% of all UK milk is Red Tractor, which is way more than the likes of lamb, which is about 60%. But the logo itself appears on about 14 billion of food and drink, and the compliance to Red Tractor is done independently through certification bodies, who themselves are certified by UCAS. I thought it's worth saying, some people are saying that it's not transparent and that we sort of sit and make up standards ourselves. That the standards are actually, the strategy for the standards is set by the standards committee, which has every sector board chair, has representatives from vets, from the food chain, and an eminent scientist in Guy Poppy. They sort of set the strategy for what we should be doing. The technical advisory committees have experts in each sector. So they're all one per sector, and they are constantly looking at the horizon, looking at the current research, looking at the current legislation to see where the standards need to evolve. And then they make the recommendations to the sector boards, which is made up by industry and farming representatives, but of course of the whole supply chain, because we are owned by the whole supply chain, including the British Retail Consortium. I'm not sure if I mentioned them. And they then agree and finalise the standards. And actually the standards committee is chaired by the vice chair, who themselves have a huge expertise in farming. So the main board is made up of the sector chairs and all of our independent directors as well, and we oversee the running of the business. But to be honest, I thought when I first walked in that it was just incredibly complex. But actually, we've got about 150 people when you combine all the technical advisory committees, all the sector boards, and the boards and the ownership boards. There's 150 people from across the whole industry that are making sure that when we put those standards forward, that they are representative of what is required by the chain, that is deliverable by farmers. If I could move on to the next slide. So moving on to what you've asked me to talk about, which is about the labelling, and coming back from our primary consideration, of course, when we're looking at this subject, is the shopper, and as you can see from this research, that actually labelling on animal welfare is not a priority to the practical shopper, and it comes no surprise to us that price is always the main thing. Then obviously visual appearance and pack size, whether it's meat, dairy or produce. But if we move on to the next slide, when you come further down, you'll see that animal living conditions are a much smaller percentage, but it's that they are there, but they are that's nowhere near as important as price and packaging visual appearance. So if we move on to the next one, it's interesting that we sort of sometimes feel that, sorry, I just need to catch up on here, but that we understand the wider context, because the shoppers today are being bombarded. I mean, we are as well, we're all shoppers, of course, ourselves, but we're being bombarded by messages, and a lot of which are, they're not designed, but they do make us feel guilty in making decisions. So it's not about making us feel positive. It's actually trying to make us feel, oh, mustn't do this, and I must look for that, and mustn't have too much packaging, and must make sure that whatever the message is that you're getting and absorbing, as opposed to rejecting. And of course, that when you're talking about a method of production labelling or welfare labelling, the challenge is even greater, because you're average mainstream shopper is rather disconnected from how their food is produced. And also when you educate people about how food is produced, it comes with challenges because many of them don't actually want to know too much. I mean, to be honest, there's probably, I mean, even if we're not just talking about animal welfare, if shoppers had any idea how much potatoes are actually sprayed, not non-organic potatoes, and how much they're treated, I think they would be horrified as well. But they don't want to know too much. And actually, if you tell them too much, it can actually switch them away from even wanting to buy the product at all. We could move on to the next slide, please. And you know, the shoppers basically sit in three broad categories as to how much information they want. The largest one is the bottom one about don't burst my bubble of the understanding. I think I know enough, and I'm happy with what I know in terms of the choices that I make. And if you start telling me about the welfare of the animals and things that happen, that's going to upset me. And so I don't really want to know. And they are leaving the responsibility of the welfare to the retailer and arguably also to the red tractor label to make them think that somebody else is checking that for me. I don't need to know, but I am happy to. I will buy from somebody that I trust on the basis that they will make those decisions for me as to what's right and wrong. There's a small group that are prepared to make simple upgrades if they can afford to do so, but again, they don't want to spend too much time thinking about the detail. And then, of course, you get the small group of shoppers, and they are very small, who want to know everything, want to know more, and they tend to be those that can afford to change their buying behaviour based on their own ethical standpoint. So if we could move on to the next slides. And this is quite complex, but I think probably if you just focus, I don't know, we've jumped a slide, I think. Go back, is there not one in between with red? Oh, okay, you've got the same one as me. What's the one after that, please? No, okay, go back again. Okay, I had a slide which maybe I took it out because I thought it was too complicated. I will talk to the one that I've got here, but basically it's talking about the response to standard practices. So about 43% of people, this is some AHDB research, 43% of consumers said they were concerned that if particularly on dairy, if cows didn't have outdoor access, 43% of them were concerned that calves were separated from their mothers. 40% were concerned they didn't have access to grazing. So clearly outdoor and grazing were asked separately and had slightly less on grazing than outdoor. I suspect that they really is the same thing. 33% were concerned about the fate of the dairy bull calves, and about 29% were concerned about calf housing. So, you know, when you start to expose some of the things that people may be concerned about, you know, they are actually quite concerned if you give them the opportunity and raise, well, are you concerned that cows are kept indoors all the time? Oh, yes, definitely. So you know, if you start, like that previous slide I was saying, if you give people too much information, you can start getting them quite upset about the method of production. But I have got a slide here of international assurance schemes. So it is not unique, and I think sometimes I sort of get the impression that people think that Red Tractor is the only food, only in the UK do we have somebody independent auditing farms and welfare standards. It's actually quite common in most other countries. These are all examples of other countries that are trying to do something about animal welfare. It's not consistent, as you can see. It's very different. They're all voluntary schemes, like Red Tractor is, but the only one that is recognised by Codex, which is the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organisations, sort of trying to set global standards. That Codex has, to be honest, it's only in the last two weeks, but it's taken years to get there, has recognised Red Tractor as an exemplar of how to do voluntary assurance. But as you can see, that there is nothing consistent. The only thing that is in common is that people are trying to give some indication of assurance, and these ones are about the animal welfare labelling. But I think when we think about the UK consumer, this is in the context of DEFRA now looking at it, that our research says that level of information isn't required by consumers, that they find it very confusing. That there's very, you know, as you can see, there's very different different ways, and none of these, by the way, have any comparison to each other. So a 1-star in the Netherlands does not mean the same at all as one heart in Denmark. So I think it is confusing, but I also think if we're going to start putting it on British products, it's got to be on the imported products as well. You can't say that, oh, consumers are only going to care about the welfare of British food. And I think that, you know, when we're talking about welfare labelling, we cannot just let, particularly with the standards, would not actually meet even legal requirements in the UK to say we must have method of production labelling in the UK, but not on imported goods. If we could go to the next slide, please. And this is really about where do consumers get their reassurance from? You know, in terms of is this, do I feel happy with the way that this food is produced? And the vast majority, these are not percentages, this is just where they say that it comes from. So, you know, in almost every country, the majority of the reassurance comes from seeing it on pack. So it's not about message in store, you know, it's not necessarily about social media. The main thing is I can see on pack, there's something on pack that tells me that this is okay. I don't need to know more than that. And, you know, our research has said that organic and free range are easily understood by UK shoppers. But as soon as you get to anything, it is production based, like, is it outdoor reared? Is it bred? Is it, you know, this is outdoor reared or bred for pigs, or is it slower grown for chicken? That people seem to then find it confusing. And we think that we think that it's difficult trying to get consumers to understand everything about production from a label, and in some cases it serves as a barrier. And of course, there's so much on pack now that most shoppers don't read or not interested in detailed welfare labelling. And if we are going to do something, it's got to be very clear. But you start to think, well, how much more are we actually going to start putting on packs? But to say having something on pack is the key way of actually getting the message across. So it's not sufficient just to tell people in social media, for example, that this product is raised in a certain way. If you go on to the next slide, please. So Red Tractor actually does have some welfare labelling. It's, you know, the core logo is the top one, which is the certified standards. We have got enhanced welfare, which is used on chicken, but of course could be used in any other sector. And that was really because of the European chicken commitment. And as you know, there's quite a lot of focus on how chicken are reared, but that enhanced welfare could appear on other sectors if we wanted to say they're not only certified standards, but this is enhanced welfare over and above what the core Red Tractor demand is. We've already got a free range one, which is used on chicken, but of course could be used on pigs. And some of you may not know, but I was once marketing director of Anchor Butter when it was made in New Zealand. And we actually launched it as free range butter. So you could just as easily use it on dairy products as well. And of course, the labelling could be extended to organic as well. So if we felt that method of production labelling was essential, there is that we already have some markers that could be used in Red Tractor that are already in use on chicken. And if we go to the next slide, please, you can see that when we actually ask people whether they understand the different levels of standards, then you know they've got very high levels. The two green ones together are generally between 74 and 80%, means that they have understood what those mean. Because I think the key, as I was trying to say earlier, is people need to know enough to make an easy decision. They don't need to know, or they don't want to know too much detail and it's too complicated. But I think this is actually quite a simple way of understanding about animal welfare associated with any product. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. The other thing, we've done various bits of research recently. Actually, I'm going to cover that. The most recent one's the next slide. This is about a year or two old, I think. The prompted awareness of Red Tractor is extraordinarily high. So if you say, have you heard of Red Tractor? 78% would say, yes, I have. If you say, can you name me an assurance scheme? Then 48% of them will say Red Tractor. And as you can see, those figures are considerably higher, but largely because it's on so much food than you might see in other more in enhanced areas such as the organic RSPCA and leaf. And as you can see, that it does lead to people saying, yes, I feel, how likely will this influence a purchasing decision? Basically, we're saying you've got two products, they look identical, they're the same price, and one's got Red Tractor. We know that they would buy Red Tractor, but how much they would pay more for that, I think that's much more difficult to determine. But certainly, there is some are saying 46% would say they would trade up. But we have to be very careful with what consumers say and what they do. Now, next slide, please. And this is some very, very recent assurance in terms of trust about would you trust food that have the Red Tractor label on? And as you can see, that's got that's a very, very high score, because we also asked, would you trust food from America and from China? I think China was the least. I think it was 13%. So actually, trusting British food, which you remember that McDonald's sign I talked about, we do not sell British beef here. The huge variation we've got to, and 74% of shoppers will say that they trust anything with the Red Tractor logo on is great. So to move on to the next slide, really that I've really got nothing more to say beyond actually reading this slide, that labelling is a critical tool in consumer purchasing, but it's got to be clear, concise, and deliver against their expectations. Welfare labelling is nothing new, it's used in other countries. But we've been told that if you give them too much information, it can become a barrier to purchase. And that Red Tractor has used these insights to develop our on-pack labelling system, where we can use enhanced welfare free range, etc. Which in a way that consumers can actually understand it, and we know that they trust it. And it can cover more tiers, but at the moment that tends to be in chicken, but it could go into other areas. And as the most recognised and trusted mark of British farming food and quality standards, Red Tractor is the flagship for British food and farming, which is the strategy that we've been trying to follow. The next slide is just a thank you and a copy of our latest advert. And I think that it's worth me actually saying that if a milk processor is putting the Red Tractor logo on the milk that goes into store, they will pay us a licensing fee. So every single piece of meat, anything that has Red Tractor on it that you see in a retail store, is paying us a licensing fee. And that money is then invested. It's almost ring fenced. I would like to say it was ring fenced, but it's it's there or thereabouts. Is ring fenced and used for promotion messages to the consumer, whether it be in TV advertising, our social media campaigns, our how do they campaigns, our consumer facing website, and everything else. And this is just an extract from our latest advert. So hopefully you're not going to ask me an awful lot more about labelling, but I've told you, I think, everything this I know. And hopefully that was fulfilling what you wanted me to talk about, Tim.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Christine. That's a really useful start. There have been a number of questions that have come in, but I don't think they're terribly nasty questions or difficult questions. Just to paraphrase one of them, you highlighted the "don't bust my bubble" category, who are clearly don't want to know too much. Why then is DEFRA getting so excited about method of production welfare labelling, just to confuse everybody?
I think I could say we're not clear. We obviously are having meetings with them. It is, I think, if I'm honest about it, I think that it's a ministerial demand rather than DEFRA are trying to respond to in a responsible way. We believe that it's because that. I think that there is a sort of an idea that if consumers understood the different methods of production, they would pay more for it, which then farmers would get more return for doing it, and they wouldn't need to get any incentives from government. So everybody, so farmers as a whole would all move towards higher welfare without the government having to pay for it, because the consumer's going to pay for it.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other question that's come in is about imported products and labelling and WTO rules and all the rest of it. What do we do? I mean, what can you do? What does the FSA do? Who actually has responsibility for this?
That's a slightly more difficult. I'm going to have to guess that it's the Food Standards Agency. It's definitely not Red Tractor. I mean, the Food Standards Agency need to make sure that it is safe. But we all know that we're already selling food in the UK that isn't produced to standards that are legal in the UK, and certainly not, you know, in some cases not to Red Tractor standards. But I also don't want to put them all down, because some countries will actually be ahead of us. And one of the concerns that I've got is that everybody thinks that Red Tractor is absolutely fantastic and that our standards are way ahead of everybody else. They are not necessarily, which is why we need to keep. Particularly, we don't tackle the environment, and the SAI global standards have now got quite a lot of environmental requirements in them. And we're concerned that Red Tractor is falling behind some of the other countries, and it actually might inhibit some exports. So please don't assume that Red Tractor is way ahead of everybody else. But we certainly are selling products in the UK already that are produced to standards that aren't legal. And I think that all fits very nicely into saying to Caroline, well, you're going to solve all this for us, aren't you? The truth is, it isn't going to be solved by anybody. We are going to have these products on our shelves, and therefore our labelling and reassurance and getting people to look for British and to understand it. Now, all my background in marketing with Mars and with Anchor is not to knock the competition. Yeah. And I think it's really hard, if you're saying, well, this is what they do, and some of that revolting habits that they have I think in Australia, when they're sort of slicing the back of sheep. You don't want to know about it. If you start talking about that to consumers, you will put them off all lamb. So I think we have to be so careful. We don't knock the competition, but we need to keep reassuring people about the standards that we've got. But there is going to be no easy way out of it. The government has refused to ban it, and as you rightly said, in some cases you wouldn't even be allowed to under WTO rules.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's been a couple of questions about calf welfare, and bearing in mind your wider marketing experience, how should the industry address some of this? Because I don't think we're terribly good at it. Well, are you saying we don't be good at industry calf welfare, or we're not good at communicating? We're not good at communicating. Oh, okay. I think this is really where Red Tractor finds that we do so many audits, and then you get one or two that somebody comes and does an expose and ruins it for everybody else. But I think I think making sure that we've got standards for calf welfare that we are prepared to live by, and for anybody to come and have a look at them. I think to make sure, our audits need to make sure that people are to the right standard. We are increasingly doing spot audits on farms as well, particularly if they've had a certain number of repeated non-compliances. We also have our whistleblower line, which I almost wish people would use more often, because if you actually believe that somebody is not, that thinking actually that farm is at risk of having an expose and damaging the whole industry, you can tell us. We will just go and do an inspection and find out about it. It doesn't necessarily say where that's come from, but I think we as an industry have to make, is stop the exposes and make sure that everybody is at our minimum standard. And I think to be prepared to keep raising that minimum standard. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And the final question, because we're going to run out of time, is from Simon Montgomery. Can you explain how Tesco can label salad grown in Spain under the Red Tractor label?
It can't. It absolutely can't. Everything that Red Tractor basically says it is in the UK. Even people knock Red Tractor about the on meat, on the whole life assured, that actually at the moment only the last 90 days of beef animal's life has been assured, but the animal has to have spent its whole life in the UK for it to get the Red Tractor logo on. So anything with a Red Tractor is UK produced. And if you ever find a Spanish one with Red Tractor on, it's a mistake. And if we hear about it, then we will take that up with Tesco. And we also do, I told you that we did we do licensing. People can pay for the privilege of putting the Red Tractor on the pack, and we audit those and make sure that so we do spot checks on them. But if ever you see something like that, please tell me, because we will come down on that like a ton of bricks. It's a bit like the expose on the calves. Sure. get that is something that has gone wrong, and we need to be right on top of it.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Christine. That's been really useful and a great way to start this webinar. So thank you very much. Right, let's move on to our second speaker, who's Caroline Drummond, the Chief Executive of LEAF, Linking Environment and Farming. LEAF's Caroline's been running LEAF since 1991, but we've also invited her to come here not only to talk about LEAF, but also to talk about her role as as one of the members of the Trade and Agriculture Commission. This was the first one, not the one that's just been reformed, and she's going to talk a bit about that and then move on to her work in LEAF. So Caroline, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, and great to hear the discussion that's already happened, and brilliant opportunity to talk about trade, labelling, and some of the huge complexities of change that's happening at the moment. So I just wanted to talk for about 5 or so minutes on this whole area of the Trade and Ag Commission. The first report that was launched in March 2021 came about because obviously it was proposed that we had the Trade and Ag Commission as we left Europe to ensure that trade deals going forwards were fair, and we knew what we were asking for, and we were obviously properly resourced behind ensuring that we grow an ambitious trade export opportunity. So the first group of us were more around the people that were some very experienced trade negotiators, the NFU representatives from the UK, animal welfare specialism and environmental specialism, and a few farmers, as well as some trade people. It was very ably chaired by Tim Smith, both Food Standards Agency and Tesco, because I can tell you the difference in opinion in the first stages of the discussions were very varied. And we came out with a final report that was given to Liz Truss, the then Secretary of State, on Valentine's Day as a special gift for her. But with it came 22 recommendations, and it wasn't cherry picking these recommendations. It was, you know, here's an opportunity for actually embracing all of these. And I think, you know, the reassuring aspect was we really did need to ensure that we had an ambitious agri-food trade strategy. And, you know, we're yet to see the development of that. And I hope that that will be one of the priorities that's going to be addressed with the new team that was formed. So they've had 2 meetings. Like us, I believe they're meeting every fortnight. We also had subgroup meetings, specialism meetings. I was involved in the consumer groupings, looking at consumer understanding of labelling, consumer understanding and expectation of food quality. And, you know, when you go into any retailer, the expectation that we take food safety as a given, as an example. The other aspect was that there should be a minister with a specific remit and responsibility to lead on agri-food trade. It is still part of the new Secretary of State, and I think, you know, this is going to be really important to ensure that the recommendations in this report, you know, government are actually they're to put up to the fire a little bit on this. Climate change being recognised as one of the big aspects and big challenges, and I think there is the sort of the Codex Alimentarius, and the more you understand about any subject, I think the less you know about the subject. It's certainly the case with the complexity of trade agreements, because at the end of the day, in order to trade, there are some WTO baseline agreements which are the kind of below this is a no-go area. Part of that is then obviously the Codex Alimentarius, and there are a group of countries starting to look much more at detail in Codex Planetarius, which is more the environmental perspectives, the climate change area, to ensure that that starts to underpin future trade agreements. These negotiations are slow. But I think where the UK has a real opportunity is being part of the discussion in these areas. And that's going to be something that's really important, because countries are looking at the UK as to how we will fulfill our future trade negotiations, because they can't be random. They do need to be strategic, and they need to be obviously ambitious, as I've said before. However, part of that requires a well-capitalized support in terms of ensuring that there is money put behind promoting UK products, and that we have representation in other countries. We currently have 2 people across the world, and when you start looking at the touch, we'll have at least sort of 45, the Australians, etc. And the AHDB equivalents are the ones that will be carrying out data as who are our target countries for exporting, what is their income, what is their food structure, what is the growth of their income over the next 5 to 10 years, etc. So there's some really important aspects that will underpin the negotiation that will go behind trade, because it isn't just like, we don't want your products because you're using antibiotics that have been banned in our country since 1986 type approach. It is ensuring that actually that we are very clear of what our export capabilities are as well. Of course, our leadership in terms of animal welfare is recognized to be incredibly strong, and that needs to, again, our leadership role in this area should continue, and we cannot compromise on welfare, on antibiotics, all the critical antibiotics that the dairy sector have put in so much effort in reducing. I'm married to a dairy farmer, and if you look at the change in our local area, in the buying group that we work in as well, these are significant changes improved by capability, skills, knowledge, and the real attention to detail that is driven within animal welfare. So these things are going to be very important. But I do, if you haven't read the Trade and Ag Commission report, it's quite an interesting read, and I think it's going to be very important. So the next chapter is going to be about the detail. So I think what we did as the first group was very much around what's it going to look like, how are we going to be ensuring that we are not compromising the standards not only delivered by our farmers, recognised through our independent farm assurance schemes, and in addition to that, with the expectation of our citizens, consumers, and we've put a lot of detail in recognising the difference between a citizen, a consumer, and a shopper, all of who are fundamentally different in terms of expectation and buying habits, etc. But this next chapter is going to be about the detail of negotiations. So I know Jim Mosley is sitting on that as the chief exec for Red Tractor. One of our board members, Cedric Porter, is sitting on that. But you have a range of free marketeers as well as some NFU representation as well. Nick von Bossenholt is so it's going to be interesting, but they are just looking and going through their trades, their terms of reference, etc. So it is early days, and the problem is that trade negotiations are coming faster and faster and faster. So this is something that we all need to be really scrutinising to ensure that government don't drop it. Next slide, please. And I wanted to build on, the importance of sustainability and where actually as an organisation, but also as a country, the UK stands. So as Tim has said, I've been running LEAF since it started 30 years ago. And I think for us, the drive for sustainability has been, paramount to our vision and our mission. And we've now sort of very clearly stated in terms of the next aspect of where we go as an organisation. It is still around driving sustainability and recognising the importance of leadership in that area and collaboration, and the capability to be flexible enough against the really changing environment and climate that we now have. So I used to say 5 years ago, our farmers don't really deal in climate. They do now. And, you know, the intensity of weather incidences mean that, you know, you can have whole crops destroyed in this country, not to mention obviously across the globe. So finding smart solutions that are going to be driving sustainability to build resilience and to also mitigate against further challenges, as obviously was discussed at COP26, is going to be really, really important. For us, that framing is integrated farm management and sort of that driving circular agriculture. And this is where we need less leaky systems. And for the dairy sector, that's, you know, has the potential to be really well defined, but at the same time has the potential to also be a really, really big challenge. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for us, we work in 3 areas. We know that if you want to drive change, it's about the peer-to-peer learning, make sure the system works, and then the market pull. The market pull is hugely powerful. As Christine has really clearly highlighted, you know, Red Tractor has been really important for us to ensure and to provide reassurance, actually, in terms of food safety, taken as a given. And so that's something that's really critical. What we do as an organisation in the development of Leaf Mark, we build on Red Tractor here in the UK as the core standard, and we build on Global Gap as a global standard of perspective. We are not a UK standard. We're not talking about provenance. What we're doing is environmental sustainability. And I think that's something that's really critical. We took that painful decision some 16 years ago, but actually sustainability has no borders. It needs to be really driven across the globe with smart solutions. And in addition to that, if we are importing produce, then it needs to be meeting the same valuable requirements that is demanded of our own farmers. And so that for us has been really important. We demonstrate those environmental sustainability credentials. We're whole farm, very site specific, global, as I've said, and we are now incorporating outcome based. So it's not just input to output, it's also outcome based, and that's going to be increasingly important. The other area, we're the only farm assurance schemes, bearing in mind there are 5 independently externally verified farm assurance schemes here in the UK. Soil Association, Organic Farmers and Growers, RSPCA Assured, Red Tractor and Leaf Mark. We will be the only one which is ICL fully code compliant, which demonstrates, one, we are operating a global standard, but actually ensures and, you know, puts us really to ensure that our standard setting processes and procedures are correct, our assurance processes are correct, and our impacts are real, genuine, transparent and traceable. And so from that point of view, we have now for the last 10 years been doing global impacts reporting, because if we're going to say that our farmers are doing something, we have to be demonstrating that. And that's meant that we've now got earned recognition with the Environment Agency, so it's a lighter touch because they know that the leaf mark growers are less risky businesses. And obviously it's now also offering practical deliverance and assurance, potentially against the sort of the local nature recovery perspective for growers as well. Next slide, please. I won't go in this detail, but we have intended impacts. So this is what we are trying to drive. This is making sure that we are drawing value to the farmers, that farmers are getting recognised for their environmental compliance. And in addition to that, they are, really clearly demonstrating against energy efficiency, soil management, water quality, etc. And this is going to be increasingly important when we look at different payment options for farmers, such as carbon sequestration, biodiversity offsetting, etc. Because we're ICL certified, we work with people like MSC, Rainforest Alliance, etc. And that again is really important for our learnings. And I think the other area that's, as people become increasingly interested in regen practices, things like that, again, it's that demonstration of capability and compliance, moving forward on a continuous improvement process. We do a lot of stakeholder mapping so that we can proportionally ensure that we are looking at realistic, achievable, and obviously dynamic approaches for sustainability. I love the fact that we work with very much can-do farmers. Next slide, please. And I think that, we know that here now in the UK, some 43% of UK fruit and veg is LEAF Marque certified. And it was interesting, Christine put up the fact that 4% sort of LEAF Marque recognition. Well, Waitrose are currently the only retailer that will have LEAF Marque on pack. However, we've kind of got this sustainability by stealth in that most retailers, if you take, for example, leeks, asparagus, etc., they will be 98% of that market will be LEAF Marque certified. So, it's that area of what is it that people look for in labels? Is it that, when I go shopping, when you're younger and you've got your kids in tow, I can't really concentrate. When you're over 50, you can't really see a label. So, what is it that labels are going to deliver? Will it be QR codes? Will it be the sustainability sourcing? We operate in 27 countries. We're carrying out obviously integrated farm management, and we're seeing increasingly evidence around carbon footprinting and, of course, soil organic matter testing, etc. 13% of the average habitat area on LEAF Marque farm businesses is down to high value environmental biodiversity. Next slide, please. And for farmers, that offers, in some instances, premiums, but it's the market opportunity. It's that area of being recognised. Sometimes as a farmer, not many people say thank you. And at the end of the day, actually, this is about that warmness of thinking, I'm doing something right. I've got sustainability credentials here, improved farm management, and actually I'm cost savings as well. So the system itself is about driving efficiency. Next slide, please. And, from that, we're now, as I said, we're increasingly looking at outcomes, but with that will come key measurable metrics. So very much what we've done historically has been qualitative data, and now we're increasingly looking at quantitative data, which then is able to be drawn against metrics in performance of sustainability, are really important. And, I think when you look at sort of what's it going to be like in 5 to 10 years' time, that data collection and the useful data collection is going to be very key. Of course, everybody rolls out that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. There are, however, instances, not everything that can be measured matters, and not everything that matters can be measured. And I think we need to be really careful because there's social and environmental dynamics which are very difficult to measure that actually are delivered in performance of better farming. Next slide, please. As an organisation now, Waitrose have been holding LEAF Marque for the last 19 years. All their UK fruit and veg is LEAF Marque certified. Marks and Spencer's is a Plan A attribute, and we're now working with them increasingly on farming with nature. We are looking also, the government of Jersey, they have recognition that if you they're a LEAF Marque island. Actually, Jersey's a LEAF Marque island. And in addition to that, we have had some recent very interesting and wow type announcements in that all of Tesco's UK and global fresh produce will be LEAF Marque certified over the next 3 to 5 years. So we are seeing a huge change in actually the standards around this recognition. That's the fresh produce, but next slide, please. Has been evident with working with Jersey, and I obviously appreciate that Jersey's got a small number of dairy farmers, but actually the capability of delivering environmental sustainability alongside the priority of obviously animal welfare on dairy is going to be increasingly important. And actually dairy farmers are really good in that area. So it's through collaboration, the importance of driving change, that export opportunity. Next slide, please. And that's where, Jersey, there's their China perspective. Oops. Next slide, please. Have you lost me? Thank you. And of course, communicating it finally to the public as well. A lot of dairy farms are really involved in Open Farm Sunday. Obviously, the last 2 years, we have not had Open Farm Sunday, but they've been online events with this event. But some 250,000 people go out onto farm every year. And it's that honesty, integrity of farmers. People want to know more. And I think we have an industry to be proud of. As Christine said, we can always improve, but actually let's work on the strengths and capabilities that we have. Thank you very much indeed. Can you stop sharing those? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Excellent presentation. Thank you. So I hope, ladies and gentlemen, you've thought we've had 2 good presentations. There are a number of questions, Caroline, for you that have come in specifically about the Trade and Agriculture Commission. Did you comment, or have you commented about labelling of imports? Or were you just looking at exporting?
No, imports equally was being looked at. So yes, that's incredibly critical. And I think, when you look at, obviously we've left Europe, but if you look at the priority now for the farm to fork ambition of the EU, this is about labelling. And when you're looking at, as an organisation, we're very privileged. And I have to say, the one good thing about, what was 1 or 2 good things about the sort of being the lockdown piece was actually we were able to reach out and communicate across the globe far more readily. And so learn a lot from, Canada and America and South America. We're doing some work at the moment now with Vietnam as well. And you start recognising and realising the sort of the ambition that others have for their exporting markets, and it all goes back to ensuring that any imports. It was very much about imports as well, and that's why we cannot compromise that whole area.
And then there's a related one about you said that our animal welfare was pretty good. How do we utilise that in trade deals? How do the trade negotiators actually try and get a list of USPs, if you like, about British agriculture that they can actually, instead of just perceptions, actually show real hard data? Because that's the problem.
And I think that's probably in 2 areas. So I think there's probably not one farmer in the country, livestock farmer, who recognises that improved health leads to better productivity, and of course, the importance of efficiency, etc., and better profit at the end of the day. So good animal welfare is a real win-win-win. So there are that element of changing. There is a saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. We don't want there to be bad animal welfare across the world. So there is that area of discussion. But in addition to that, there are countries who are not happy with the welfare as their wealth increases, and so are looking for integrity in importing products that meet their requirements. And we mustn't forget that. So us being able to demonstrate the efficiency, the fact that these critical antibiotics, this is pretty serious stuff in terms of ensuring that and we have done a really, really good job of ensuring our efficiency much more in that area. So I think there's 1 or 2 areas that we can really look out for, and that animal welfare is a big thing. And there's there are global benchmarking criteria. So I think we come about 3rd in the world's animal welfare. I can't remember the exact.
Yeah, we are about 3rd. Yeah. Okay. And then this is a question from me, really. You've talked about leaf mark and how you see leaf mark developing and all the rest of it. And Christine may like to comment as well. And it may be a red rag to a bull, but do you work together to make sure there is commonality, or are you in just straight competition?
No, I mean, we're in different areas. So we're in environmental sustainability. We do work together because obviously we build on the base core area of Red Tractor. So if there are amendments, changes made within the standard, then obviously of Red Tractor, that has to be accounted for within the leaf mark standard. We work with governments, and so there's been a huge, Dame Glenys Stacey, her recommendation, I was very fortunate to sit on her red tape group, and one of her recommendations was really trying to understand better that trust model and interaction between voluntary approaches, i.e. leaf mark, Red Tractor, inspection and legislation. And the more that, legislation is about preventing harm at the end of the day. And if business has demonstrated very clearly it is not harming, and then actually from that perspective, that's a big tick. It's an easy one for government to say, right, this is your responsibility. So we've worked, we do, and of course on the software area as well. We are compatible. We both work with an organisation called EverySite. So there's compatibility of the APIs and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Christine. Do you want to add to that? But just before that, there's a comment from Peter Alvis, the chair of RABDF. Is there a danger of customers becoming logo assurance mark blind?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to go back to your previous thing.
Yeah.
The word is we're complementary. We work well together, and almost all leaf audits are done by the same auditor on the farm. When they've done the Red Tractor audit, we'll then go ahead and do the leaf audit. And at the moment, there's very little within Red Tractor that covers environment. There's not necessarily what I would agree. I think there should be something, there should be some more base things in it, but that got very firmly rejected in our version 5 consultation. So they are very much complementary, that they are a different set of standards that work together. So what was it, whether they'll become, I think, actually, as a direct response to Peter, I think the concern is that, and I showed that graph about how important it was to have that reassurance on pack with the labelling. I think most of the retailers, people don't necessarily recognise that Red Tractor sits between the sort of the retailers and the millers and everybody else and the farmers, and we're always being pulled in both directions. The retailers very much would like Red Tractor not to be putting stuff on pack, not to be spending stuff or spending money on consumer advertising, because they think that their logo says everything that it needs to. So we are fighting to actually make sure that Red Tractor is there on the pack to reassure the consumer. I think that the retailers really want you to trust, if it says M&S, then everything else is going to be behind it. And it will be Red Tractor assured, and as Caroline was saying, it will be leaf assured. But M&S think that theirs is the brand. And I think that when you're trying to say we want people to buy British, if you just leave it to Tesco to just put Tesco on and you don't notice that it comes from Spain rather than from the UK, we need to keep that Union Jack on the pack. So that's one of the things that we're insisting that isn't necessarily what the retailers want. You're saying, why are you spending this money on consumer advertising? It's our duty to reassure the consumer on trust. So I don't think the retailers will allow too much. And I think that there is a concern that if you suddenly have mandatory method of production labelling, you then might say, right, well, there's no room for anything else.
Just very quickly, I mean, the joint inspection is absolutely critical. Sorry, I should have said that, but yeah, that's sufficient and it works well. And that our, all this ISO 7065 is really critical. These certification bodies are key. But in terms of, there aren't a lot of assurance schemes, and I think it goes back, as I said, there are 5, which is your 2 organic standards, RSPCA assured, Red Tractor and leaf mark. And I think there are a lot of brands, and people like brands. It's the sort of, if you look at the younger generation now coming through, oh yeah, I'm going to get this brand because it's the latest, etc. Yeah. But what we're doing, it's about standards, and I think we need to be really careful we don't confuse standards with brands.
Super. Well, thank you very much. Time is against us. There are a number of questions still, but on the basis that I'm meant to finish at 11:30, and it is 11:30, I think we better stop. So can I thank, on behalf of everyone on the call, Christine and Caroline, for a really good session. So many thanks indeed. there will be, if you look on the RABDF website and the web pages and social media channels, there'll be up-to-date news about other activities that are going on. We've got the webinar tomorrow about environmental challenges facing the sector and the development of future legislation. And once again, thank you very much, not only to Caroline and Christine, but also to Barclays and for farmers for sponsoring these webinars. Thank you very much. Really good. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.